All right. So we're going to talk today about
See, how do
supporting.
we? Oh,
Oh,
go ahead, Stephanie, and I'm going to send Nancy a chat question.
oh no, you're fine. So we're going to be talking today about supporting new and expectant parents of children with disabilities and preparing for employment across the lifespan. So, and I come at this just kind of giving you a little bit of my background. I am the director of our National Center for Prenatal and Postnatal Resources. I'm also our LIND family faculty. And if you're not familiar with the LIND program, it's amazing. It's an interdisciplinary program with students from, from social work and physical therapy and medicine who are taking more intensive disability studies classes to learn how to apply that to their field. So I'm involved with that. And I'm also the mom of a 23-year-old with Down syndrome and also 21 and 16-year-old girls. So I kind of share the personal perspective and the professional. This is my family. And then these are some of the resources that we distribute through our program. And so just to kind of give you a little background on how I came to be introduced to this life, I like to give this preface that my son was not actually born in the 1960s, but my husband is very artsy and into black and white photography and always has been. So that is why you see the old looking photos. And that's not my husband, that's my son's grandfather. So I have to give these prefaces. But these are the NICU photos that we have. And when he was born, he'd aspirated some meconium. He had low platelet count. He had some issues feeding. And his diagnosis was a surprise to us. I was 23 years old. And they came in about 4 hours after he was born. And our pediatrician was pretty matter of fact about it. He just said he has, this and this and this symptoms of Down syndrome. And I think he did just fine, but I have a friend of mine who felt even better about her experience, where her pediatrician was a family friend and came in and said, Violet is beautiful and she's healthy, and I'm also fairly certain she has Down syndrome. And she liked that presentation because since they knew the name, they addressed the child by name and talked about some of her characteristics, and then also introduced the diagnosis. So I think that's helpful. And where our hospital was really progressive, I'm going to show some more pictures. Where our hospital was really progressive is back in 2000, they actually had parent support staff who worked in the NICU, and they had one of the parents had a child with Down syndrome, one had a child with cleft palate, and one had a child with hearing loss. So they had these parents with lived experience who were working as staff in the NICU, who were able to come in and share, what they had gone through. And they handed me the book, Babies with Down Syndrome, at the time right away. So I had information, and showed me a picture of the mom showed me a picture of her son with Down syndrome on a bike. And for me, that was such a normalizing moment to realize that we could still have fun and we could still, go out and do activities as a family, because there were a lot of assumptions based on when I was growing up, and we didn't have inclusive classrooms like a lot of the kids are growing up with now. So it was really helpful to get that perspective early on and to see what some of the possibilities could be. And that's a really important moment, because that is the first point on the life course, and it sets a lot of those expectations for the future. And just to kind of flash forward to where we're at now. So now that he's 23, my son's actually, he's auditing a couple of classes at our local, one of the little local universities, and he's taking classes in primarily photography, speech, and business. And he also works at our local grocery store, and he is he's doing photography, this is one of the pictures of him out doing his photography. And this is one of the pictures he took. And I like using this to set the stage for our diagnosis experience, because this was a picture I saw as I was flipping through his iPad when he and my husband had come back from a trip. And when I first saw it, I thought they were on a dock and that this was the ocean, and that these were kind of angry ocean waves. And I was a little mad at my husband. I was like, why would you go out, when it looks like that? You would have been in danger. That's terrible. And then I kind of adjusted, and I realized, oh, it's actually this mountain range, and I have been at this overlook before, and it's not what I thought it was. And I think that's a lot of what the diagnosis experience can be for us as families, that when you first see it, it can be this really overwhelming, scary thing. But then when you adjust your perspective and you kind of realize it becomes more familiar, you realize that there's beauty to it. And you also realize that there are hills and valleys, and there are shadows and light. And it's just it's just part of our human experience. And there are definitely challenges, but also strengths that we have as part of that. So I've given this presentation to other groups at different times. And I like to ask this question, but since there's only two of you, I don't want to put you on the spot and feel like you have to answer them. But I just think about, kind of imagining yourself as this first time mom. I'm 23 years old, and what kinds of questions do you think you might have, or preconceptions or concerns, or what have you seen in patients, some of the concerns that they have?
I just think, I mean, I'm not a parent. I've never had any children, but I certainly have a lot of special people around me that I love, as if I couldn't love them anymore if I biologically birthed them. But being a nurse, all of us, are in healthcare here. Julia is a nurse as well. Jared's in healthcare, one of our other superstars. And so people, I think, feel this sense of hopelessness and doom, because it's kind of, people, birthing is usually, or should be, and historically has been, having a baby. It's new, it's fresh, it's this new little beautiful person that you're responsible for, and it's supposed to be happy, and joyful, and in your eyes and in my I just tell you, I haven't seen a baby that isn't beautiful. I just really haven't. I have not seen a baby who isn't beautiful. So when 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 life comes into play in reality to maybe shift what people think, and that whole level or expectation, everything
Mhm.
changes, because I think people come in with certain expectations of what this perfect little person is going to become and is, that anything that overshadows that does overshadow that, right? And it's just this, what do I do now? Because I was already just, I'm on top of the world, and what does this mean for my beautiful child, right?
Oh yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a good point, because I know that, here's the cold hard truth. All of our kids shatter our expectations. And I think that the difference is you have more of a baptism by fire when you've got a child with a disability who has something maybe you didn't expect right away. But the joke I've told in the past, but it's true, is that the difference between Andy and my other kids is that I just had a little bit better of an idea of what his challenges would be. The other kids got to surprise me. Um, because they all have their own things, and they all end up having their own strengths. But it is in that moment of having that precious baby where you imagine the whole world is going to be perfect for them. When you have to adjust to that, it's different, and it can sometimes end up being uh, an even better experience once you adjust to it. But
Right.
it's
Yeah.
still definitely adjustment. And some of the concerns I had going in, I was worried
Yes.
other kids would
This
make
one.
fun of him.
Yeah.
And those are some of the real life kinds of questions people have. And we just graduated from college. How would we afford to get him the help he needs? I remember being worried, would he live with us forever? And then also, would our identity be forever tied to Down syndrome, which sounds like such a weird thing to be worried about. But I was like, I'm not going to be me anymore. I'm going to be the mom of a kid with Down syndrome. And I know that sounds weird, but at 23, that felt very overwhelming. Um, so I'm going to give you the answers to some of these questions. Number one, would kids make fun of him? Well, on occasion, but what I've learned is that kids that are mean to him are actually the kids who are mean to everybody. So it's not that he's targeted in particular, but he was much, much cooler in high school than I ever thought about being. That wasn't a super high bar to begin with, but he actually had a really great experience. He went to every school dance. About affording the help he needs. Could we have done it alone? No, but fortunately, we've got some really great programs available that help people. So, we were able to get in touch with early intervention right away, and we were able to get speech therapy and physical therapy and all of those resources through early intervention. And like now that he is an adult, he qualifies for a Medicaid waiver where he's able to get some other kinds of support to help him achieve his goals. So, so could we afford it on our own? No, not really. But with the supports that we've gotten, it's helped a lot. And it hasn't been as expensive as people would think, in the sense that, we kind of just have to pay for him like we do all of our kids. All of our kids are expensive in a way. So there's that. And then would he live with us forever? I can tell you that he's had his bags packed since he was 13, and he has every intention of moving out. And right now we are bribing him with a large screen TV to stay for just a little bit longer, because it's just helpful with transportation, because he's going in 3 different directions in our county and our house is in the middle. But I'd love to go ahead and take your question, Dr. Talbert.
Yeah, I was just curious because I think Stephanie, this is also showing us something, and with you, and everybody's not you, and I mean that complimentary, because you had a big thing, this life-changing event at 23, pretty young, where you're still growing. But I think of all the things that you were able to do for your child, and because you had a parental support group and you were aware of the resources. What do you think? Because I always have to bring in the intersectionality, right? When you look at probably less people who are not as exposed, and you don't know what you don't know, so you don't get to take advantage of those things for your child, and the path they follow, I think, is so much different.
Mhm.
So what would you advise us when we have parents, and let's just say, we'll say Down syndrome, since that's what we're talking about. How do you get people connected immediately? I mean, because that seems like that's what you had, and these were things that I think made your son have a much easier path. I'm not saying it was easy, but easier.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, so I'm glad you asked this question, because we currently have a Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute grant, where we are looking at how to improve the dissemination of research and supports to Black and Hispanic new and expectant parents of children with Down syndrome, and hopefully extending to other disabilities. That's our goal. But we've held community conversations with those parents, and also with health equity experts and with medical providers, with the goal of looking for, what are their concerns at that point of birth, and what barriers are they experiencing, and what solutions do they propose. And I think a lot of it is making sure that you're referring people to the entities that have the best support systems for them. And by that, I mean, as clinicians, you have so much that you're balancing, and to know all of the ins and outs of, supplemental security incomes, SSDI, the early intervention, there's so many things. I think the first points of contact that are really important are, number one, your social worker at the hospital. The social worker at the hospital hopefully is in there immediately after these babies are born, and can direct them to some of these resources that might be most helpful for them. And I think it's also important to remember that representation matters. And that's what a lot of those families have told us, to make sure that among the disability advocacy organizations, the social work, the medical providers who are serving them, and social support services, that there are people who look like them who are also providing that. I think, and being inclusive about hiring that way. So, and I'll give you an example. So when I had those 3 parents who were at the hospital with me, now granted, this was in Utah, they were all 3 white parents. And we need to make sure that that is not what the composition always looks like, right? So I think that the representation, they said, was really, really important to them. Also making sure that they're being connected with people who can help them with those social determinants of health. Particularly, and I've been in this case where we were low socioeconomic status for a number of times when we were young, because having a child with a disability young can exacerbate some of those things just because we had some additional medical expenses. And so there were times in our life when we qualified for Medicaid proper, and making sure that people know where to turn for help when they have that. And typically the organizations that can help with that are those social workers at the hospital, the advocacy organizations, and also early intervention. And early intervention is really particularly helpful because they come into your home and they can provide those direct services. But I think, and just kind of so you know where we're leading to with this project, and I'll be happy to share it with you once we have it all developed, but we're creating a white paper that's giving all of the recommendations that were provided by those families and health equity experts. And we're also creating a free online course for clinicians. So both of those should be available in the next year, but those are just, some particular things to be aware of, and also making sure that if you have resources that they're translated for any population that you might be serving. So for example, almost all of our resources are in English and Spanish, but because our Down syndrome resources are the oldest ones, that's actually translated into 10 different languages. So making sure you're also providing resources in the language people can understand. And that doesn't just mean translations, that also means in the accessibility of the language itself. So making sure there's a health literacy component that people can understand what they're being provided, and that there's representation in those resources. So that's something we've been really mindful about, where all of our resources have representation from people of different ages, different ability levels, and different races and ethnicities. So all of that is really important as you're providing those services. So did that help answer that question? But feel free to ask me more. Okay. I think one thing that has been really helpful for us has been a friend network. For Andy, there have been, oh, go ahead, Julia.
So how old's your son now?
He's 23.
So now things have changed so much with social networking and those kind of environments, and really changing the outlook for children who have special needs and how they interrelate with society and grow up. So how are you finding that as your son grows in a positive way and then in a negative way? Because I think that's something, at least for nursing and navigating with new parents when they have a child with special needs, how to help them understand how that might affect them as well.
Sorry, I just had a door open. I think that, so that is a wonderful question, first of all. And since my son was born, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have any of those things. And I've been very active in those networks, providing support as he's gotten older. And it's been fun to see how that's evolved. I think that what's really neat is that there are parents who can connect, who have some more rare combinations of conditions. So say you have a kid with Down syndrome and esophageal atresia. You might not have someone in your local group who has that, but you can find someone in these it's called the Down syndrome, it's the Down syndrome diagnosis network. And they have all of these little subgroups where you can connect with people with co-occurring conditions. So I think that's one of the major benefits. And I'm so sorry, I'm actually going to move to another room for just a minute. It got a little hectic in here all of a sudden. Sorry about that. And sorry to make you all dizzy as I move. That was very quick. And I'll give you kind of a neat story from a self-advocate perspective. So that's my perspective as a parent, right? We can connect now with these subgroups. I think one part of it that's kind of hard. Thank you, Andy. Thanks. Andy, would you actually like to come say hi on this call? Okay. just thought if you'd like to meet Andy, here he is. He just walked in the door. They can't quite see you.
No. Hi.
Hi, Andy.
Hi.
Hello.
You? This is real life Andy, and I made this whole family whole thread all myself.
Hey, Andy, can you tell them how you met your girlfriend?
Andy is like really dressed up. I'm impressed. I just want to say that. You look very nice. We can't hear you either. Tell Stephanie, your volume is gone.
Oh,
Yeah,
Okay.
now we can hear you.
okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
I'm good. So my girlfriend's side, she has Williams syndrome.
She has Williams syndrome, yes.
I'm the one to talk about it, and I have this negotiation with myself that went to, and that's good. And we start dating 2 years, we can start talking about it and stuff.
Okay, cool.
and
Thank you,
it's
Andy.
Cool. I made this my whole family. I got my Nono and Kay and my twin brother, and his name is Swagger, and all my all my siblings read. I go the one with my sisters and my brothers, and we go hang out and hang out with my parents gang, and we go out.
Thanks, Andy. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to finish giving my presentation,
Yeah.
but I appreciate you sharing a little bit because what he was saying is that he has a siblings thread with his friends, and they keep connected that way through through texting, and I guess he uses WhatsApp and YouTube and all the things. And so it helps him to keep him connected with his friends, and it's helped him to meet other people. I ended up getting a random Facebook message from a girl one day who said, "I want to date your son." And I said, well, I don't actually know who you are. And I looked her up, and sure enough, we had friends in common, and she had Williams syndrome. And so I asked Andy, I said, "Is it okay if I give you her information and she gets yours?" And he said, okay. And so they started FaceTiming. And I told her, I was like, you guys might want to be friends first, and then you can decide if you like each other well enough to date. But they have actually been talking on FaceTime. She lives in Michigan. He lives here in Georgia, where I live. And they, she's his girlfriend now, and she totally slid into his DMs. So I think he would say that social media has been a benefit. I think where it's kind of scary as a parent is we have had instances where we've had to teach internet safety, where he's got an Instagram account and he had somebody pretend to be, I think it was Joe Jonas, and ask him to give him his credit card information, which was, it's really disconcerting as a parent because they clearly targeted him knowing who he was. But at the same time, I mean, those are internet safety that lots of kids need to learn. And so we ended up having to have conversations about how you never share your credit card information. And that's just something that you never do. I think as a parent, some of the drawbacks of social media are maybe it constructs either a more positive or more negative life than is realistic. And so then, you might be comparing yourself to other people. I think that's always a concern too with social media. So that's my answer to that question. And sorry that ended up being long, but I thought it would be nice for you all to get to see Andy. And so some of I guess what I wanted to talk to is kind of preparing for employment, starting with some of these early conversations. And so I already mentioned for us a big component was early intervention. And actually, I'm sorry, I wanted to skip through here. No, I don't. Just kidding. Early intervention was a huge answer to our concerns about finances and how are we going to afford, some of the services that we need. And like I also said, Andy's ended up having a much better experience than I thought he would with peers. And he's got a real good peer support system. And it includes people who don't have disabilities. And it also includes people who do have disabilities. And we've tried to be really mindful about that so that he has support in all aspects. And that's what I like too. I mean, I have friends who are parents of kids with Down syndrome, and I have friends who are from, church and work and all kinds of places. So I think it's important to give that diversity of community so that they have lots of places to turn for support. And so you guys have already kind of asked this about what kinds of information you think you'd want to receive, but are there any other kinds of information you can imagine that parents first learning about a diagnosis might need? Or that you've already seen?
I think this is good, and not just going through what you have. Is this all that you have? Are you
Oh
finished?
no, I've got lots.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just go through and
We'll keep
all
going.
this has
Okay.
been keep going.
So we have local support groups, and actually, if you go to resources.hdi, I've got the link over here, but anyway, it's got a list of all of the local parent support groups. So if you have questions about how to connect people, you can do that. Online parent support groups, that goes back to your question, Julia, that there are social media groups, there are online forums, and then there are like disability specific ones like Down Syndrome Diagnosis Network. I just joined one because I'm doing a project with the Spina Bifida Association that's like the parents of kids with spina bifida in Georgia and Tennessee, so there are social media groups for any kind of, condition at this point, which is so wonderful. And then HDI resources, what we all offer you is we have our HDI resource directory, and that has all of the resources for people with disabilities organized according to, finance, health, and it shows you what's local and also national. We have our Lettercase National Center for Prenatal and Postnatal Resources that has resources for people first learning about a diagnosis of various different genetic conditions. Although our newest one is going to be spina bifida. So we have currently Turner syndrome, Jacobson syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, Down syndrome, and soon to be spina bifida. And then we also have, and that basically gives people what they need at that moment of diagnosis that covers, possible medical issues, but also life outcome information and supports and services. And then it has photos of people with the conditions as well and the different translations. We also on that website have training for clinicians on how to deliver a diagnosis. And there's a module with video vignettes on how to handle difficult conversations. So that's another tool that we have at this lettercase.org website. And then downsyndromepregnancy.org is directed more toward families, where it's got, and also for people who've adjusted to the diagnosis and want a lot more information. So we've got books on there that are PDFs that are like 150 pages and cover how to prepare for a NICU stay, how to breastfeed your baby with Down syndrome, how to, and also any heart defect, how to breastfeed through that. So we've got a lot of different, and it's kind of a book that, what to expect when you're expecting a baby with Down syndrome. So those are the range of different resources we have. And all of it's available for free. So we're just so happy for people to utilize it and be able to help them in practice. And I think a really important conversation to have with families when they're first learning is to help about the diagnosis is to help them figure out what their own natural supports are. And for every family, it's going to be different. But that's a huge issue. For our family, it was one of our resources is that we come from a big family. My husband comes from, this is going to blow everyone's minds, but my husband comes from a family of 14 and I come from a family of 4. So we've got lots of siblings, lots of cousins. And so that has been a huge source of support for us in both childcare and, being involved in advocacy organizations. Another source of support for us has been Boy Scouts and church. And so, and those are just kind of, every family is going to be different. It might be that they're heavily involved in the equestrian community in Kentucky. It could be any range of different things, but help them figure out where they can turn to for some of those natural supports. And I think in those early conversations too, some of the strategies to discuss disability are to help families connect with mentors who have that lived experience. And they can find that often through their local advocacy organizations. Special Olympics is a really great connection, as well as the ARC, and all of those advocacy organizations listed in the resource page at HDI, helping to decide whether they want to use person first or identity first language. And that's a really kind of interesting topic in the disability community, where some people prefer to be, like in Down syndrome, they tend to prefer a person with Down syndrome as person first language. But in the autistic community, there tends to be a preference for an autistic person. And so it takes knowing the community to sometimes understand which language is preferred, but also just asking the person. Because I've got an employee who has autism who prefers person's first language. And so sometimes it's also just asking them and saying, and giving recognition that people might have different preferences and that you are willing to honor that. And I think that's huge. The importance of avoiding stereotypes or assumptions, that's where a lot of frustration sometimes comes in. And presuming competence. And that sometimes can be a hard one, even for families, because they might have some preconceived notions too from when they grew up. Clinicians might have preconceived notions, but just it's really important to make sure that we give these kids opportunities and see what they can do and be understanding when they might need extra help, and to provide those supports as needed. And just assuming that kids with disabilities belong wherever they would like to be, and keeping the big picture in mind. And when I say keeping the big picture in mind, I think as a clinician or as a teacher, any professional in the life of a person with disabilities sees one piece of the pie, and it's an important piece, and the family really needs them there. But there's a lot of times this whole big picture, and I can give the example of that with education. A lot of times when Andy was little, they were really, really worried about him learning, like, oh, he's got to learn his ABCs by the end of kindergarten. He's got to learn what the phonetic sounds of each of the letters are. And my concern was more looking down the road, when he gets a job someday, will he be able to interact with the people in his workplace? And how will he be able to function that way? And that big picture was really important, because ultimately that's, again, what leads to employment, what leads to a fulfilling adult life. And so even though I actually have whole talks about being a mediocre mom, and I sort of am in some ways, I've lost him a lot of times. I don't know that I've ever, and I shouldn't admit this to doctors, but I don't know that I've ever completed a full round of antibiotics the way I'm supposed to. I usually forget one at least. And so, and there are things where we have struggled, and but I think that the thing that I really caught hold of was the importance of including him in everything in our family life, and also including him in our community and in school as much as possible. And again, looking at that big picture, sometimes as a parent, you want to do everything for your child. But we knew it was really important for him to learn how to function in the family and function in the community. And I got some really good advice early on from a friend who has 2 siblings with Down syndrome. And she said that her mom was really good about making sure that her siblings with disabilities were spokes on the wheel and not the hub. And I really tried to live by that mantra as much as possible. You can't always, if your kid's in an emergency health situation and you're undergoing heart surgery, that child has to be the center of attention. But we try to make sure that if, one kid, if the other kids have chores, he has chores too, and his might look a little different, but that he has expectations for work and behavior in the home. And it's really taught his sisters to be accepting of all kinds of differences by having him as their brother. And I think that's been a relative strength for them. And this actually is a picture of a poem my daughter wrote about the importance of including people with disabilities when she was in middle school, because she started seeing some kinds of injustice where he actually was other kids that weren't being included, that they were getting frustrated about. It wasn't actually their brother. But they start to see some of that social injustice in the world, and they become passionate about lots of different people who experience that. The other thing for us was making sure that, like I said, keeping him involved in work and also going on adventures together and doing sports together. Not always, as you can tell in the top picture, happily, but we did it, and we got out and built those relationships. And there was an expectation again that he was part of all of these experiences, just, with his sisters. And when I talked about earlier about that value of inclusion, this was early on when there was a lot of concerns about, we don't know if he can be in his neighborhood school because we don't know if he's going to need to go to this other school that had more classes where he wouldn't be integrated. He would be segregated from the rest of the population. And we really had to advocate for him to stay in his neighborhood school, even though he still received those special education services. He stayed at his neighborhood school and was included for usually at least half the day. And that's where he really learned skills from his peers on how to interact with others in the world. And here's a little picture. Actually, I love this. So this girl he went to prom with is actually the same. She's also in this picture of the little kids on the steps when they were in 3rd grade. And it's because when kids grow up together and they see each other as peers, then they are able to, there's a lot more acceptance there. And that was really important for us, was that all the kids saw him as Andy and not just as a person with Down syndrome. And we don't have a whole lot more time left, but I do want to talk a little bit more about this value of inclusion as it leads to work. So when Andy was about in his senior year of high school, he ended up getting invited by the lacrosse coach to be part of the team. And he said, I don't want him to be the manager. He's like, we have a manager. I want him to actually play and to practice with us. And I was like, isn't lacrosse kind of dangerous? And he's like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Okay, well, I will trust you. And he ended up being part of the team. And by about the 4th game, he went out onto the field when the team captains go, and they flip the coin and it decides who's going to start the game. And I was like, well, why did Andy go down there? Is that okay? And they said, well, he's told us he's one of the team captains. And so we decided, because they usually have 4 or 5 team captains anyway, they said, so we're fine. That's fine. He can be one of the team captains with us. And then about halfway through the season, I start hearing them chanting on the field, and they would say, Woodstock, Woodstock, Andy Meredith. And I never knew what they were saying. And of course I was, fascinated. I had no idea until the senior banquet. And at the senior banquet, he went up on stage when he got one of the awards, and they said, okay, Andy, go ahead, do it. And he said, who's your team? And they said, Woodstock. Who's going to win? Woodstock. Who's your captain? Andy Meredith. And then but then he added another phrase on, and he said, who's your coach? And they said, Andy Meredith. And so it was on that day that he made himself an assistant coach and has been doing that for 4 years. And I tell that story because other people saw in him the capacity to be a leader and to be part of a team. He took that up, he internalized that, and he saw that as an opportunity also to build on that and become a leader. And so I think that's a really important component of inclusion, and not just inclusion, but embracing people who have differences. And so I think that's a really key piece for people to see their own potential and for others to see it in them. And it's also not a one-way thing. This kid here in the middle, he actually his girlfriend passed away in a car accident about their junior year, who's a mutual friend. And this kid was really struggling with grief. And Andy was the one to go over to his house and bring him cookies. I mean, I sent him over there with the cookies, but he just sat with this kid. And he didn't try to talk. He didn't try to make it better. He just sat with him in grief. And that's something he uniquely knew how to do. And there have been a number of ways in which he has been the strength that other people needed. And it wasn't just a matter of them doing things for him. And so there's some of the photos now of him coaching. And this whole team has been very inclusive, not just of Andy as a person with disabilities, but they also have this other coach, Conway, who has multiple sclerosis and is dealing with that. And so there are a number. So it's not just about, I know I'm telling the story of my son, but this can and should be extrapolated to give everyone those opportunities. And what also came out of this experience, I'm going to skip over here, and this is my final story for the day. And when Andy was about 16 and we were driving home from school, he said he wanted to go get a job at our local grocery store. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to call Voc Rehab, and I'm gonna have to set up a meeting with the school, and we're gonna have to talk to Publix and figure out all these things. And in Andy's mind, he was telling me what his plans were for the afternoon. And so I cooked dinner and sent his sister to go get him. And she's like, Mom, he's not here. And he had actually taken off on his bike and driven up and ridden up to the grocery store and on his own. And I had 2 missed calls on the phone, and he'd said, Mom, I go to Publix, I go get a job, you come get me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, because there's a major intersection on the way over there. And I didn't want him to drive home by himself. It was getting twilight. And I called the store and I said, no, please. I think my son's there applying for a job. And I didn't want to embarrass him. So I was like, but can you please not let him leave until I come pick him up, because it's getting dark. And as I was driving over there, freaked out, my husband was like, Stephanie, could you have ever imagined that the thing you'd be most worried about at 16 is that he drove off on his own to go get a job on his bike? And I was like, no, I did not peg that one as coming down the road. So that we got to the store, and sure enough, he'd ridden his bike over there. He found a friend. And the reason why he wanted to work there is because he saw his friends at school working there. And he asked this kid how you get a job. They sent him to the front desk. He started filling out the kiosk. And, his reading level is only at about 2nd grade. His math is barely kindergarten, 1st grade. But he's found these ways to adapt the world around him, where he's got social skills, he's got these photography skills, and he's been able to build careers and a meaningful life and meaningful relationships for himself. And they were so impressed with his initiative that they pretty much hired him right away. And he's been working there for 5 years. He just got his 5-year service award. And it wasn't because I'm particularly special. It wasn't because he's even particularly special, but it's because there were a lot of people involved who gave the opportunities that he needed to be successful. And I think it's really important that we make sure to give all kids and all individuals those opportunities to learn and grow and to achieve whatever potential they have to do their very best in this world. And that's pretty much it for me. And I'll leave like just a couple of minutes for closing questions, but thanks so much for joining me today.
This was great. I'm just like, I want to meet Andy again. I think we need to have him come and talk to more people, and especially some of the people we'll have. We here will be, you may be, well, yeah, I'm sure you are, Stephanie, familiar with Project Search. And so we're excited because of people like Julia and Jared. We are able to launch this next month and give other people a fair opportunity to reach their highest potential, and whatever that may be, we don't know. But it's all about the things that you as a mom have done for your son. And I think such a beautiful story of Andy and you, and I'm sure your husband and his siblings, but we're excited because we feel like, and we have called Project Search a pathway of possibilities, right? The sky is only a view, not the limit. And so we hope to have many stories we can come back and share with whoever wants to listen. We don't care. We'll share it because we believe firmly that these will be success stories like Andy, because I think I mean, when I think of him going to this store and at 16, I mean, there are just so many kids that don't have that same level of energy and enthusiasm. So I love it. I think your stories have been tremendous and your delivery is great. And you certainly have a great story to tell, but it really is a story with a purpose, right? Meaning. So
Yeah.
just wanted to share that. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. And we have a number of friends who've done Project Surge, and it's been
Mhm.
incredible.
Yeah, we're excited. We launch August the 16th, so it's less than a month away.
Well, and I can tell you too, as a young mom, when I would see those, because I remember seeing a young woman when Andy was in for pneumonia and had a really kind of scary bout. There was a young woman with Down syndrome who worked there, and it was so reassuring for those younger families to see people thriving in those positions. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I will forward a link once I figure out where we're going to host the recording for this session. So
Okay.
everyone can, I'll let you know where that's going to be.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank-
We'd love to
thank-
share
Thanks
this.
so much.
Yes, it was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you,
Sorry for
everybody.
dealing with the room moving.
Hey, you were patient with us getting on and our small audience. So the room change was no big deal at all.
Yeah.